Florida Watercolor Society artist friends, welcome to the July 3rd Thursday. Did you know it is only 63 days until the beginning of the Florida Watercolor Society convention with the Stephen Quiller demonstration? Now that means that you better start registering for the convention, the exhibition review, get the tickets to the gala, to the one-on-one critiques, a hotel, because many of these are limited. And once they're gone, they're gone. This year we have lots of changes to accommodate for our workshop artists' schedules and working with the Hilton Hotel. One is the exhibition review is going to be Friday morning from 9 to 10. Kim Johnson-Neckman's demo will be on Saturday from 11 to 1. The trade show is extending its hours, and they're going to open at 5 o'clock on Thursday before the Stephen Quiller review. So be sure to visit the trade show, get those watercolor shopping lists, and get those great deals. This year, there's also a concession stand to order food for lunch, but you'll need to bring your credit card because the Hilton is a absolute credit card only facility. But bring cash because Florida Watercolor Society is cash only when you buy those raffle tickets and tickets for the paint around raffles and so forth. This year, our raffle baskets. Be sure to look out for, we have a starving artist basket that has a $50 gift card from Publix. Jack Richardson is supplying art supplies for the Stephen Quiller basket. And we have a Dolly's Diva basket with a melting clock and other goodies. The Florida Watercolor Society board is working very hard to get all of the details ready for the convention. And trust me when I say there are a lot of details. But it's such a rewarding experience working with this talented group of individuals. And there is space for one of you too if you would like to serve. If you are interested, please contact Catherine Leathers or Gwen Kodad. I am looking forward to seeing those of you who will be bringing in your artwork to the Creative Pinellas on Monday, July the 29th. Just a reminder, check-in will be from 10:30 to 12:30. Receiving by the gallery for those shipped pieces of art must arrive between July the 24th and 26th. And don't forget your paperwork and those fees. Our last Third Thursday is next month. And we have quite an experience planned for you. So mark your calendars now for August the 15th, when our International Florida Watercolor Society basic member and Daniel Smith Global Ambassador, Rajat Bandapahia from New Delhi, India, will be joining us. Now, Rajat can hold up to 12 watercolor sticks between his fingers, and that's his paint palette. And he creates beautiful paintings with intricate textures and details. Be on the lookout a couple days from now for the video of this replay of this Third Thursday event. So go to your Florida Watercolor Society webpage, go to events, and then go down to Third Thursday. And now Suzanne Natzke is our Florida Watercolor Society volunteer coordinator, and she has a few words to share.
Hello, everyone. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has already registered to volunteer to serve at the convention. If you have not already gotten an email from me in response, you will be soon, so be on the lookout. But there are a lot of jobs still open in all different areas: raffle, ticket sales, registration desk, audiovisual tech, artist assistants, door monitors, loading and unloading the truck, everything. There's openings for everything. There's something for everyone. And the earlier you sign up, the more likely it will be that you will get the position that you would prefer. So it's first come, first serve. And we really appreciate the help from everyone. It takes everyone coming together to put on a big convention like this. And it's really fun and rewarding to serve. You get to enter into the gift basket for the volunteers and, of course, have a painting in the volunteer art show following the convention. So please consider volunteering. And you can click on the volunteer button on the website.
And Suzanne has done a fabulous job as our volunteer coordinator this year. And thanks so much, Suzanne. But now let me tell you a little bit about Suzanne's art career. She started painting in watercolor in 2001 and studied under several local and nationally renowned artists. She's a signature member of Florida Watercolor Society, Georgia Watercolor Society, and the Florida Suncoast Watercolor Society. Her style incorporates bold value contrast, a vibrant and harmonious palette, and simplified shapes reflecting her fascination with motion, the effects of light, and the desire to capture a moment in time. Today, she's sharing some of her ideas on how to make your own original stencils and stamps. And don't forget, if you have any questions or comments, go down to your Q&A button. We will not be monitoring the raised hands or the chat button. And now, Suzanne, I'm going to turn it over to you and I have my notebook ready to take notes.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberta. And hello again, everybody. So yes, I'm going to be sharing how I make my own original stencils and stamps. And this is just one way of doing it. It happens to be my favorite way. There are a lot of different ways. People use different materials and have all kinds of great ideas. So it's personal preference, but these materials that I use are pretty easy to get a hold of and easy to use. So I hope you'll give it a try. The purpose of having your own original stencils and stamps is because when you purchase a stencil or a stamp, some other artist has designed that. And if you've ever entered Florida Watercolor or maybe some other juried shows, they talk about things like original artwork in the prospectus. And the use of commercial stencils and stamps is frowned upon because you are incorporating some other artist's work into your picture. So when you make your own, then it's your design and it's kind of like your own trademark. It's also convenient. I have had many times when I've been working on a painting and I think, gee, I'd like a certain shape or some little pattern or something, and I can just, whip something up on my own very quickly. So I find it convenient. It keeps me in line with the prospectus for juried shows, and it's a win all around. I do use stencils a lot with my Yupo abstracts, and I'll be demonstrating Fearless Yupo abstracts at the convention in September on Friday afternoon, and I hope you'll join me there. But I also use stencils and stamps with traditional watercolor paper, and I use them not only with watercolor, but with mixed water media. Sometimes I will use them with things like gesso or matte medium to create a resist. So you can use them for a lot of different things. So let me just flip my camera. And this is an example of a painting done with both stencils and stamps. The squares are stencils, the little squares. This pattern here and down here, that's a stencil. The stamps are these leafy shapes. These all came from a stamp. And when I use it on Yupo, I can lift with the stamp too because it wets the paint and you can lift it out again. So you can add or subtract with a stamp on Yupo. These linear marks are also from a stamp. So it's a little bit of everything mixed up in here. My favorite material for making stencils is Yupo. And Yupo is something a lot of you already probably have in your studio if you've ever worked with it. You can buy it by the sheet and cut it up, but you can also get it in pads. They come in 9x12, and 11x14, and then they also have some smaller sizes. 9x12 is a really nice size, as you will see shortly, for various things. And this Yupo is 74 pounds, which is a medium weight. They used to sell a lightweight Yupo, but I have not seen it for sale anywhere lately, so I'm not sure. And I think it's a little too flimsy for a stencil, because you want it to have enough weight to lay flat. But there's also a heavyweight Yupo, which is 144 pounds. And I would not recommend that because it's going to be harder to cut through. So this is perfectly sufficient. And you can get that from any of the art suppliers and on Amazon. This is translucent Yupo, which you can see through it. And that is also very useful, as you will see very shortly. So Yupo is my material. And some of the other tools that I use are a self-healing cutting mat, and a smaller size is actually, I think, easier to work with, because you can turn it and work with it more easily when you're cutting out different designs. A pencil, an eraser, a straight edge if you're making geometric kinds of patterns, and then a nice sharp X-Acto knife is the basic cutting tool for this situation. And make sure this thing is tight. I found when I work with it for a while, sometimes this loosens up and things get kind of loose and crazy. So
Suzanne, do you have a preference on which X-Acto, the brand that you use? Which X-Acto
no, this is X-Acto X-ACTO. So I think that's the official. The one thing I will say is there are different shapes of blades. So I don't know if you can see this, but yeah, that's looking pretty good. This one's a little longer and skinnier. This one's shorter and fatter. And I like the shorter, fatter one because it feels more stable when you're trying to cut things. This feels a little bit wobbly in my hand. So that's my only recommendation there. The other thing, though, is that a lot of times people buy an X-Acto knife and then they just keep it forever and they think, oh, that's all I have to do. Well, these things can get blunt over time. They lose the sharpness, and you can buy new blades. So if you keep it sharp, it makes it a lot easier. There's another tool that I've lately been playing around with, and this is a rotary cutter. And this is optional, but it's a lot of fun. It cuts. It's actually, I think, something they use a lot in sewing for cutting patterns and things like that. But it has a little guard, and you pull the guard back, and then you can just cut very quickly and easily with this. But it does move quickly, so I would save something like this for shapes that are bigger and not too twisty and turny, because it's hard to get into little nooks and crannies. I would save the X-Acto knife for those kinds of things. But if you have a big, easy shape, then this is really fun and it's easy to use. And the size on this is 18 millimeters. 18 millimeters, and they do sell replacement blades. So that's kind of neat. And I got this on Amazon. So I just want to show you a few stencils I have. I've got a whole bunch of them that I've cut over the years. But as some of them are as old as 10 years old and they're still going strong, which is another reason I love Yupo, because it's very sturdy and you can scrub through it, you can wash things off, and it just holds up really well. And you can carve very realistic things out of Yupo and make, stencils of anything that you like. I went through a phase of making my own sketchbooks, and I made a bunch of little nature things, frogs and armadillos and dragonflies and things, just to stencil something on the cover. So you can do things like that. But you can also make just very simple, basic little shapes. And this is kind of a sampler sheet that I made. And I just sat down one day and I drew everything and cut it out a little bit at a time. But, it's nice to pull this out and have different things to choose from.
So how do you get those sharp corners and the squares and the
We will talk
rectangles?
about that in
Oh,
just
okay.
a minute. This is
Oh my.
some spirals I did, and this was a rose or some kind of flower. This is one of my oldest stencils. I love this thing. This is about 10 years old, and I've lost a couple of cross pieces, but it's been a great stencil. And it took a little measuring to lay out, and you have to allow for the spaces between the squares and things like that. But it's not that difficult to create simple shapes. And here's another one that's an old favorite. And these circles were, I think I used coins or other round things to trace around to get the circular shapes. But it can be less than perfect. These are kind of my wonky circles. And I actually like stuff that doesn't look totally perfect a little bit, especially when I'm working in abstract. So, for example, here, these are not perfect little rectangles. Some sides are slightly longer than others, and everything doesn't have to be perfect. It's art, and there's room for those imperfections because they can look kind of charming. So don't feel like you have to be able to make a perfect circle or anything like that.
It looks like you're having a whole lot of fun making stencils.
It is. I just love it because whenever I get an idea, I just kind of carve it up. So this was inspired by some vines I saw growing on a tree. And this was, I don't know what this was inspired by, but like feathers floating down or something. It's just whatever idea I have, I can cut something and make shapes out of it. There's some, and it's nice to have some variation in your spacing and things. Everything doesn't have to be all the same width, and you can have a lot of variety. And what this does is it makes it unique. It's not just another cookie cutter kind of a stencil. Oops, let me get rid of that. So let's talk about the cutting, because there's to me, it's not rocket science, but there's a little bit of a trick to it, because you kind of want to save your hands. It takes some pressure to cut through the Yupo. You have to press pretty consistently the whole way. And you want to have some control so you don't overshoot your lines. Although I will say I've made mistakes plenty of times, and you can just try again. You know, if it doesn't work out, it's just a little piece. It's not the last piece of Yupo on earth. So you can, you know, redo things or try it a different way. So this is kind of a long, straighter line, which is pretty easy to cut. And the motion I want is to pull towards myself. I don't want to try and cut across things like this because it's harder to press down hard when you're going at that angle. So the easiest way is when you are pulling toward yourself. And I don't want to hold my X-Acto knife like this because this puts a lot of pressure on this knuckle. So I pop my second finger up there, and that spreads the pressure a little bit when I'm pushing down, and it's much more comfortable. And I know a lot of people have issues like arthritis or maybe carpal tunnel or things like that. And I don't want to scare people off. I'm not cutting through granite here. It's just a piece of Yupo. But if you're doing something like this, you don't have to do like that sampler. I didn't cut that whole thing out in one sitting. Do a little bit and then rest your hand and take your time. There's no rush. And sometimes it helps to get some kind of a grip that's easier to grab onto. I've seen them for pencils and things like that. So I'm just going to press down. And the other trick is how to get that to follow the line. When I'm pulling, I'm not watching where the tip of the X-Acto knife is going. I'm looking ahead to where I want it to go. And that's a trick in drawing too. So, for example, if I want to make a straight line and I'm watching where the point of the pencil is, it's pretty good, but it can be a little wobbly. But if I look at where I want to go, my eye is moving ahead of the pencil. It's easier to draw a nice, fast, straight line. So that's not the greatest example, but it's that's the mentality. You want to look ahead of where you're going. So I'm going to pull. Oops, let me get my finger up there. And just pull down towards myself. And come back the other side. And if I don't follow the line exactly, it is not the end of the world. No one's ever going to know that it wasn't perfect, because in the end, it'll still be a nice shape. Sometimes a corner will catch. You just need to pop it loose, but that's it. That's all there is to it. Now, on
Like you were really working hard though there.
There is some pressure. It's not
Yeah.
super hard.
Yeah, you
But
just have to use that pressure.
trying to be careful. You know, I'm not rushing because you don't want to overshoot where
Right.
you're going. I think circular things or curvy things give people a hard time. And so this approach is kind of like a sewing machine. So with a sewing machine, the needle is in one place and you move the fabric around it to where you want it to go. And that's kind of how I'm going to do it here. I want to keep that pulling toward me motion. So I don't want to have to turn and twist my arm and my wrist. That will make it really hard to follow your drawing. So if I just stick it down here and start pulling towards me and then turn the paper, you can see I'm not having to move my hand very far because I'm turning the paper. Whoops. And, sometimes you don't push quite hard enough and you'll know, and you can just go over that spot again. But there it is.
Huh.
Just turn the paper to follow the curve.
That's a really good tip. I would never have thought of that.
So that's the basic way to cut things. This was one I did with the squares. This is easy because it's a nice straight line. And I just decided I wanted some nice big squares for something.
Now, when you're holding that, have you ever torn that little bar in between?
Yes,
Yeah, I was gonna say that looks tricky there.
that's what I'm talking about, not overshooting. You have to be a little careful
Uh-huh.
and slow down as you're coming to the corner. However, I've done some really, you're going to see in a minute, some much more complicated things. And I've cut through things I didn't want to. And when that happens, I get some of this kind of tape, Scotch tape. I put it on one side and then I flip it over and put it on the other side and cut off any excess tape, and it's repaired. So
It's a good idea,
this
then.
will save you. And, it's not like I just wrecked something that cost me $13 or something. This was something I made. You can make it from an old failed Yupo painting. You can wash it off and, just use old paper and things and get a nice stencil out of it. So, um, let's see. So that's a stencil. When you have cut something out and the shape that you're going to make on the paper is the part that is the hole that the paint goes through, or where you're adding or subtracting paint. That's a stencil. There's
Okay.
another kind of thing called a mask. And a mask is kind of the opposite of that. So this would be a mask. These are some flowers and this is on the translucent Yupo. So I had a picture of some flowers from a photograph that I took, and I put the translucent Yupo over the picture, and I just drew, the shapes I wanted, and then I cut it out. And you can see this has an edge around it, and this does not. So if I put this down on my paper, on my artwork, which I will demonstrate shortly, and I add or subtract paint, this protects whatever is under this mask, just like masking fluid would. So that's kind of like the opposite of a stencil, but they work the same way in a sense.
And when you use that, you don't get paint doesn't ooze under it when you're
If
trying to use
you,
it as a masking.
yeah, we'll talk about water control because you do
Okay.
have to be a little careful there. But yes, the idea is that this is going to protect your paper underneath wherever this is laying.
Mhm.
Um, I use transparent Yupo or the translucent Yupo a lot for masks because I can design things. And let me give you an example. So here's my sketchbook, and I wanted some kind of a linear pattern. So I just got my big drawing pencil thing out and started making lines. And then I laid the translucent Yupo over it and traced what I wanted to use from that. And then I cut it out and got this.
Oh my goodness.
So this this has some nice bigger shapes. I used the rotary cutter for a lot of these bigger shapes.
Mhm.
And I have to be honest, I had something out here that accidentally got cut off, but you would never know that, and who cares, right?
Mhm.
So, if you make a mistake, really don't sweat it, because overall you've got a really cool looking thing here that you can use in a picture.
So how long did this one take you to cut out?
Oh, I didn't cut it all at once, but I would say maybe an hour,
Oh, okay.
because I was being careful, and I wasn't rushing. So
Now, do you ever use the pieces you cut out for anything else or?
sometimes I do. When
Mhm.
I have cut, um, I did a sheet with some bigger circular things, and I saved those bigger circles because I can do things with those as
Right.
masks.
Mhm.
Now, here's where I kind of went off the deep end. And last November I did a workshop, and Roberta, you were there, and
Yeah.
somebody had a tree stencil that they had purchased, and it was beautiful. And I did something with that as a part of the demonstration. But I thought, I want a tree stencil, but it's got to be my own. So I had a photograph of some really creepy looking trees on the trail near my house. So I used my
Oh,
um, uh, translucent Yupo to trace that out. This took a lot longer to cut because it's got a lot of fussy parts in it. And I had to do a couple of repairs with the Scotch tape
uh-huh.
because I cut a branch.
That's
So,
really nice though.
but it is kind of neat, and it's mine, and and you can flip it either way, by the way, when you have stuff like this, in either direction. So I'm going to do something with this in just a minute. So, and I tried some other trees too. So, you can get very intricate if you're so inclined. Um, it's up to you how much you want to work. And there's nothing wrong with simpler designs. You don't have to take it to this extreme if you don't want to, but it sure is fun.
Oh,
So
but the possibilities.
yes, definitely. So let's do a little stuff with paint here. And I want to do something with this tree because this is fun. So this is a piece of Yupo, and um, I put some paint on it and let that dry. And I'm going to put my tree on this. Maybe I should do it on the darker one. Let's do it on this. It'll be a little more dramatic. So let's put the tree on this. And this is a mask. So in theory, this is going to protect the paint underneath it. And I'm going to take one of these Mister bottles, and I'm going to just let that sit there, and I'm going to mist this paper pretty evenly. And then I'm going to take a paper towel, and where did my roller go? I'm just going to use a sponge roller here to kind of evenly blot the whole thing. And this is a little damp, so I got to pick this up kind of carefully. Let's see. But
Oh,
there you see,
wow.
how that leaves now this paper towel had a pattern on it, so I have a little bit of a pattern on my paper, but I can buff that out with the
Mhm.
a little bit with the sponge roller.
Hmm.
So, you see how you can get a nice subtle
Yeah.
lift around something like that. And let's do another, well, let's use this, which is a pretty color. So, let's do some lifting with just a regular stencil because there's a technique to it.
Okay.
Okay. So if I'm using something like this, it's all about water control because if I gush too much water into this situation, this is Yupo with dried paint on it, it's going to seep under the stencil and I won't get a clean edge. And I want a clean edge. That's important. So I take a paper towel, not a tissue or anything like that. A paper towel works best. And then I'm going to dip just a little teeny bit of it into my water, just barely, oops, barely getting it wet. And I'm blotting off any excess. So this is just really a little bit damp. There's no juiciness to it. And I can just wipe out things. I can wipe it out back to pure white, or I can wipe gently and leave a little color. I'm using the dry end of the paper towel there to buff it a little bit.
So now, do you do the same technique on regular watercolor paper?
If I'll show you how to do that in 1 second.
Okay.
So, because it's a little different. So I'm using a drier part of the paper towel. I don't want to add water. I want to be very careful. And I'm not pushing into corners. I pull in from the edge of a corner rather than
Oh, okay.
pushing toward it because that can shove water under the edge. But that way I get a nice clean lift.
Oh, wow. So now when you're doing your abstracts, do you kind of go around and build all of this texture and then you do something with your abstract, or are you doing it
Um,
as you go?
uh, Both actually. I will do more with stamps in the early part, which
Mhm.
I'll show you. But when I put the initial paint on, but then I come in with stencils and start kind of cutting into things. And so, for example, on this piece, um, I have big stencils that are just big squares so I can cut in, and take out giant chunks and kind of carve out a shape of paint in this picture. Um,
And I
and
guess
I
that's what you're going to
also,
be going over in the demo
yeah,
at the
yeah.
convention. Yeah, that'll be fun.
But here, for example, this stamp was laid in the initial wash.
Oh, I see it now.
So it created a pattern.
Mhm.
And this one was, I think, done later to lift back out. And the other stencils and things came after I got my initial start going. So,
Okay. Hmm.
but it's, you're doing things throughout. So that is one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is add paint with a stencil. So get some paint. And in this case, if I'm going to go darker than what's there, then I just add right on top. Let's say in this area where it was purple, that I wanted to put something warm in there, like a yellow, then I would lift the purple out first with the stencil like I did here. And, I would keep it there. And then once that was lifted out, then I would come in and add the yellow on that clean white surface.
Oh,
So that because if I put yellow on top of purple, what will I get?
mud.
Right.
Neutral.
So, here, this is kind of a peachy color. I'm going to add something like burnt sienna. That'll be fine because they're related. So the way I like to add color is with these cosmetic sponges,
Oh.
wedges, and I get them at Publix. And they come in these little wedge shapes. These I've used and washed out. You can reuse them. I've used them with watercolor and acrylic, so they work fine. And you want to use them dry. If it's wet, again, you'll insert too much water into the thing and you won't get the nice sharp edge. Here's where it gets, I don't want to say tricky, but you have to know your paint. If you are the kind of person that works from a dry palette, meaning you have paint that completely dries up in the wells, it's going to be hard to get the consistency of paint you need to do this. My paint is always juicy. My paint is always pretty much the consistency of fresh squeezed. And I
I can
keep
see
that,
it's wet.
yeah, I keep it that way all the time. I can put a palette knife in and stir it around and it's juicy. Not watery, but like toothpaste. So um it's perfect for this kind of an operation. If I worked from a dry palette, in this situation, I would want to squeeze fresh paint. So instead of trying to reconstitute paint, because then you're going to probably end up adding too much water. And you have to control the water, especially with Yupo. So I'm just going right into the well. I think you can see. Here, let's pull it over. And I'm getting some of that burnt sienna on here. And then I'm just going to dab it right over my stencil. And you want to hold it down. It's a little sticky because it is thick like that. So hold your stencil in place so you don't get some weird thing, but then you get a nice
Oh, yeah.
looking result.
Uh-huh.
Now, if I wanted to add a more pastel version of this, a lighter value, I can't just use straight out of the well with a dark color like that because that would, it just wouldn't work. The value would be too dark. So I need to get something to lighten it up. Get my tube open here. There we go. So I've got some Chinese white pigment here. And I can take some of that and mix that, not with a bunch of water, just what the bare amount I need to get a lighter value. And that way I can pick that up. Let's get a fresh sponge. It's not too juicy. And I can add some lighter value shapes to that.
Okay.
So that's one way of lightening the value, is to add white and to your color, and then you can get that difference. Any other questions on that so far?
No, but I'd love to see you put that stencil back where you lifted the off of the purple and see
Uh-huh.
how you can add a little color back in there. Not
Yes.
over the whole thing, but just part of it, just to see how.
Let's
So you gotta line
line
it
her
back
up.
up pretty good, okay? And it's dry enough now, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. And that's the nice thing about it, because it was dry pretty much immediately. Um, because you're using such a small amount of water. Let's put something like yellow or orange in there.
Now, using that sponge dry like that, that's probably keeping you. I know you had mentioned if you do the wet in the center and pull it out, it'll let the water go underneath, but that's the sponge is probably keeping it from doing that, isn't
It is, and the paint is so dry, there's no flow.
it?
There's no
Yeah.
flowing paint, so I can get a nice,
Oh, yeah,
nice
looky there.
looking
Oh,
thing.
you're good.
It's not hard when you have your
Mhm.
stencil. It
Yeah.
just saves the day.
Now, I'm sure everyone's also wondering, how do you keep your paints that creamy and
Ah,
good?
yes. Um, I treat my palette like a garden. I
Okie
have
dokie.
to go out and do things to it. About every 6 weeks to 8 weeks, first of all, it's a good palette with a good tight lid.
Mhm.
So that is part of it. And I do spritz it with water when I open it up, because I have a ceiling fan going at all times for self-preservation. I have My paint will dry out, so I always keep it moist as I'm working. I went to Hazel Stone's workshop, and I know she said don't ever do that, but I've been doing it for over 20 years, so
Mhm.
I can't break my habit. But um, um, I every 6 to 8 weeks, I take my water bottle and a palette knife, and I add a little water and I stir. And
Oh, okay.
and that keeps it fresh and juicy and gooey and just the consistency I like.
So you don't put like a sponge, a wet sponge in there to keep it
No,
safe, it just,
no.
so what kind of palette is that that has that good
This
seal?
is the Cheap Joe's piggyback.
Oh, okay. I thought that looked like a
Yep.
piggyback
And
one.
it
Yep.
comes in a smaller size. This is the bigger one.
Mm-hmm.
And it also has a smaller size with 17 wells. And the lid fits so beautifully, and it will keep your paint moist if you're a regular painter. And every time you use it and open it up, you spritz it, and you do that spritz and stir every 6 or 8 weeks. It'll stay really nice. Some people complain that they get mold and mildew, but my house is always very air conditioned, or, we keep the heat and the air pretty consistent year round, and the humidity is very low. It's always about 47% humidity. So I have never had a mold problem.
Hmm.
Now this is traditional watercolor
Okay.
paper. And of course you can add a stencil. Um, let's do some circles here. You can add or you can take away. And adding is the same thing that I do with Yupo. I think that if you come in with too juicy of a brush, it's going to shove under those edges and you're going to get something kind of blurry.
Right.
So I still do the same thing with a sponge. Um, and um, let's see, let's get some paint.
And what kind of paints do you normally use?
Uh, a lot of my colors are American Journey.
Okay.
I do use a couple things are Holbein, and some things are Da Vinci, which I think they make American Journey. So
Yeah, I think so.
let's see, let's go with a blue here or something. Another. So, same thing. I'm dabbing with my sponge to get my circular shapes. And there they are.
Mhm.
Um, and you don't have to use the whole stencil. You just use what parts you want. I will sometimes do something like this. Let's get back on here. And I'll pick up another color. So I dipped into that yellow,
Oh, uh-huh.
and you can combine things and get some interesting
Oh, yeah.
green. There's some green in there now. So you can do different things. And of course, because it's Yupo, I can wipe this off very easily, so that it's clean before I do the next thing. I don't want to have that color maybe on there. So I'll just wipe all that paint off. Because on this one, I want to try lifting. And on regular watercolor paper, I don't want to tear it up.
Mhm.
But I can't just wipe it out with a paper towel. So what I'm using, some people might use a Mr. Clean magic eraser, which is possible. But I think that a sponge like this is a much easier thing. So I wet the sponge, I squeezed it out. I don't want a bunch of excess water going underneath. So I'm just going to scrub gently with my natural sponge. I'm following the circular shapes. This is kind of a lighter color to begin with. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I can see
Oh,
my
yeah.
lip. So it'll depend on how much paint you have on there and if it's staining or not and all that good stuff.
Now, when you're finished with your painting on the Yupo or on the traditional watercolor paper, do you need to use a fixative on that?
On the Yupo, I will spray either it's the golden, I can't remember. It's a golden fixative. It's got UV protection. Or
Okay.
Krylon makes some different products. Krylon Crystal Clear I've used. Only on the Yupo. I don't worry about it on traditional paper. But on Yupo, yes, because you just don't know, if I mat it under glass, that's fine. But if that painting sells and somebody takes it apart and they don't realize it's Yupo, they could accidentally destroy it if they um, are not aware that and if it's not fixed. So always on Yupo.
Right.
And you just follow the directions on the bottle or the can. So any more questions on stencils before we go to stamps?
I don't see any more questions on the stencils,
Okay, let's get these out of here.
but Nancy's iPad wants to know about that stamp making.
Okay, stamps. Uh, let's see. Let's get some of my favorite stamps here.
Oh my goodness.
These are just some of the different, I don't know how well they show up. They're covered in paint. So, but this is the leafy thing that I used in that painting I showed you earlier. So,
Uh-huh.
um, and let's see. Anyway, so those are some examples of stamps. The material that I use, you may have heard of. It's called foamies. And foamies are these sheets of foam And you can buy them in a giant package at Michael's. And it comes in two different ways. Some of them are just pure foamy, front and back, no different. Other foamies have adhesive on the back. You just peel this off and you can stick it down. So you can use either. If I'm making a stamp, excuse me, you can see I use the foamy as the base too,
Mhm.
and it's a little bit flexible. You can use other things. Let's see. This one, I used a piece of foam core and I stuck the foamies on there. So
Now say that again.
this was foam core, the base of this
Oh, okay.
one. But I prefer foamies as the
Yeah.
base because of that flexibility. I just really like that. But you could use foam core, you can use an old mat board piece, you can use an old piece of a cereal box, anything.
Wow.
And the nice thing is I use the ones that are plain as the base usually, and then I cut the designs from the ones that have the adhesive, because then I can just peel and stick all these shapes
Oh,
down. So I just cut these out with my little scissors and make, whatever kind of patterns that I like. And I use these with all different media. I use these with acrylic paint. I use these with watercolor. Um, Watercolor, well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the point is that you can use them with anything. And
those look so professional. They look like they're store-bought. Wow. That's
oh,
amazing.
and well, they're so easy to make because you just I kind of made this as I went. I just cut some shapes and I built it as I went, adding different shapes to it.
Mhm.
But my favorite one is the rolling pin.
Oh my goodness.
So I stuck all my little shapes on the rolling pin. And I love using this thing. This is fun. So I'll roll something in just a minute. But I just wanted to give you an idea here of, here's a stamp that I was making. So I cut these shapes. Here it's got the peel off adhesive. You just peel it off
Mhm.
and stick it on, and it's done.
And that's just on one of those little foamy squares then.
Yep. You
Wow. How
can
about
cut the
that?
size. They come in a bigger sheet and you cut it to whatever size you want.
Mhm. Hmm.
Now, there's another thing you can do with these. Um, can you see on this one, there's
Oh
some
yeah.
linear elements.
Uh-huh.
That is made by I use a stylus to press down and draw or emboss some lines in there. You could also use a ballpoint pen to get the same effect. So on this leaf, I can make a vein, for example, um, just by pressing down.
Hmm.
I can, and I go over it a couple times and it'll stay. It will not, you won't lose it. So that's all you have to do to emboss something into the shape.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's demonstrate that real quick, how that looks on something. Um, Here's where we want to talk about paint consistency again. The thing about these foamies is that they do resist just a little bit sometimes. So I have better luck when the paint is a little thicker and less watery. Again, with the water control, it makes a difference. So I'm just laying that color on there. And the other thing I will tell you is the more you use one of these stamps, the less resistant it becomes. It kind of, the more cruddy it is, the better it works.
Mhm.
So I'm just applying the paint on there, pressing down, and there it is.
Wow. Hmm.
Here's another thing you can do. I'm going to wet the paper a little bit. And I don't want it soaking wet or it won't work. I just want, I'm going to let the water kind of sink in just a little bit. And now I should say, while I'm waiting for this to soak in, let me grab another piece of paper. There's still paint on there. I can do a second stamp and it'll be less intense, but it's still, if you're
Yeah.
doing a whole big painting, it's nice to have something repeated somewhere.
Uh-huh.
So that's another thought. And now that is, the shine is still on there, but I'm going to start loading this with color. And the shine is just about off, so that's good. And I'm going to put that down and press gently. You don't have to mash it too hard.
Oh.
And it will start diffusing a little bit. It'll be a
Mhm.
softer print because you can see it there. The edges are softening because that was wet underneath there. See the difference? So that's kind of nice. I've done backgrounds like in still life where I have my background color and I'll stamp something in that maybe not this much of a color difference. Maybe it's more of a tone on tone.
Mhm.
So, you know, if this was, I wouldn't have used blue. I would use maybe, you know, a light burnt sienna or something. And it's very subtle. It's really pretty to do.
Mhm. Hmm. That was a good tip. I like that variation there.
So let's do the rolling pin because that's fun.
You just been dying to do that rolling pin.
I love my rolling pin. So I'm just using my mister and I'm just gonna mist it a little bit. It just helps pick up some of the paint and soak it into the paper a little bit better. And here's something fun. I'm going to do two-tone on the rolling pin. So half of it's going to get painted blue.
So one of our questions that just popped up is they want to know, what do you call your works? Mixed media?
Um, well, the watercolor or excuse me, the Yupo painting, that's 100% watercolor.
Mhm.
Um, I also paint things in acrylic and I mix watercolor with ink and gouache and I do things like that. And you know, I haven't really put anything like that into Florida watercolor, but it's something else I do love to do. So
Mhm.
it's only mixed media when you're mixing media.
Right.
So if I
Mhm.
mix watercolor with gouache, that's mixed media. Using a stamp or a stencil does not what makes it mixed media because it's still all watercolor in this case. So here we go.
Oh, wow.
And you can come back on it. So yeah, if it was a little wetter, it might have soaked up the paint. But you know, if you're rolling it far, you're going to lose some of your paint. but it's still a really neat,
Yeah, I like mixing that color on there too. That made it really interesting.
there's a softer
Oh, yeah.
roll because it's, so, if you pick the right color in the right situation, you can put a really great pattern, especially if you're working like a full sheet or something.
Mhm.
You can go far with the rolling pin. And the way I clean this off is with baby wipes. Because
Oh,
I don't really want to run this under water particularly. But I get my baby wipes, BOGO at Publix, and
mhm.
just you can wipe off excess paint and it's cleaned up and ready to go. Any of
Folks
these
want to know
stamps.
where you got your rolling pin.
The rolling pin I got in the cake decorating department at Michael's
Oh,
years
okay.
ago.
I thought you were going to tell me the kids' toy section in IKEA.
Nope, that was it. So, um, let's see. So that's the thing. I did want to just show a demonstration of the um, embossed stamps because that's kind of,
Okay, so now we have a question, and Janine, you might have to retype this in because I'm not sure I understand it. But she says, so do you mention the stamps and stencils question mark, stamped watercolor question mark, or just a watercolor?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I know, I'm not sure. Okay, Janine, if you can type that in again, so we can understand what you're asking. And Pat wanted to know when you cut out the pieces of the foam to paste,
Yes,
to stick back on, what did you use to cut out the pieces? Was that X-Acto or scissors or what?
scissors,
Ooh, little ones. Okay.
little scissors,
Oh, now that circle you did, that was one of the ones that you pushed in with the you embossed it with
embossing.
that looks cool. Yeah.
And there's the leaf with the embossing
Mhm.
of the
Okay.
veins. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, you can draw all kinds you can put polka dots or you can do anything with the embossing. So, and this is nice to stamp into something damp again. Um, where I've been watching this where I missed it. Look how that
Oh,
softened
look
up,
at that. Yeah.
which is really cool. So,
Uh-huh.
you can have it real sharp or real soft.
Okay.
A stamp doesn't have to just be a stamp. It can be, and I'm going to take a second stamp here on a damper surface. And that softened up a little bit.
So, I think Janine is, she had asked about was this mixed media, and you did a great job explaining that mixed media is, combining the watercolor and a gouache or watercolor and acrylic or whatever.
Right.
But so I think she wants you to give us what do you call your style of using
Oh,
the stamp? You just call it simply watercolor?
yeah.
Still just a watercolor, yeah.
It's just Tim, I kind of think what I get what she's saying. It's about making interesting shapes in your paintings
Hmm.
and adding interest. And if you come to my abstract demo in um, September, you'll see kind of how I figure out how to use shapes to move the eye around the painting and create focal areas and things like that. And so to me, it's just making fun shapes that I can use. And I don't very often make realistic things. I do tend to stick more to things like this and like this. And
Hmm.
um, because when I paint straight traditional watercolor, I don't use any of this kind of thing.
Right.
This is more to me something a little more experimental that I like to use with the Yupo and some mixed media things that I do.
Okay.
So,
And let me just go back over one more thing. Pat, so she asked that you cut the pieces out of the thin foam and then you peel off that backing and then you either put it on cardstock, mat board, or another piece of foam.
right.
Okay.
And if you don't have the self-adhesive, you can glue it down with Elmer's or glue stick or anything like that. So you don't have to get the peel off if you can't find that. You can just get regular foamies and glue those pieces down with regular kinds of glue.
But you prefer sticking those onto another piece of foam so it has that flexibility, right?
Yes,
Okay.
because as much as I like this one stamp, and I really do love this stamp, when I go to pick it up, it's hard for me to pick it up because I can't, with this, I can
Oh,
bend up a corner and lift.
gotcha.
That's just a personal preference. So, but different people like different things. I
Right.
also had here an example real quick, if I can find what happened to it. Oh, here they are. These were some pieces of Yupo where I put the paint on, and then this is actually this one stamp where I just set this in and let it dry and lifted it off. And, you know, as part of my Yupo start, I got some interesting
Very interesting.
patterns there. This one, now I have to say this real quickly. We're running out of time, but years ago, I made a stamp out of this heavy linoleum stuff that you have to carve. This was murder to make. That's this pattern. I do love this pattern. But it was hard to make. And nowadays, you can make stamps with a product called Speedy Cut by Speedball. It's this creamy colored. There's also Speedy Cut Easy, which is a blue color, and that's supposed to be even easier. But this is these are flexible. You do have to be a little careful. They can get brittle and crack over time. You'd have to get a cutting tool, which they sell this, and it opens up, and there's different tips that store in the end, and you can just, it cuts pretty easy. So I drew some linear stuff here. So, you know, I would just, you can see it cuts
Right.
very easily, and you can make anything you want. So I do have some stamps that I make with that. Here's a couple that are carved out. Let's do the flower
So
one.
that's more of your traditional block
It
printing.
is.
Oh, because
And I use these more with my acrylics and stuff like that. And you can put something like gesso on this and stamp it on paper before you paint on it, and it'll create a resist. So you can get a pattern underneath. You know, you can stamp repeatedly with something with gesso to create a pattern under your paint. So, you know, there's my flowers.
Oh, yeah.
So you can do a lot of things with this Easy Cut, and these are not too expensive, and they come in different sizes if you're so inclined. So, and it can be anything. This is linear.
So when you do, say, one of your abstracts with your stamps and stencils, and let's just say it's on traditional watercolor paper, you would say, okay, this is whatever the title is, And then you would say it's just a watercolor. You don't say, you really don't address the texture of it or the stamping or stenciling. You don't even mention that, do you?
No, because that's not media, that's just a tool.
Okay, yeah, because we don't say we painted this with a paintbrush. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And if I was incorporating acrylic, if I started out in watercolor and then I added some fluid acrylics or some ink, now I've gotten into mixed media territory.
Mm-hmm.
So this all works the same with acrylic paint. Um, this is the last thing I've got to show you.
Okay.
Um, and this is something, but I know there's people out there who are curious about acrylic. So this is a gel plate, and this gel plate can be used like a palette. So I can squeeze some paint onto this thing and get my roller and roll. This is acrylic paint now. And I can take that roller that I've rolled out my paint and I can roll it over my stamp and make a stamp out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I can also press this right onto that palette and pick up some paint and make a stamp that way.
So that's a little more, oh, no, that one. I was gonna say the other one. The first one is a little more opaque with the acrylic, but that one came out, yeah.
Yeah, there's a little, it's not, I'm not perfectly picking up. There's some variation, and that's fine with me. I don't want everything, super. But if I did it here with the embossed stuff, let's see how that picks up the acrylic.
And if now you did watercolor stencils back there, then you would say this is title and mixed media.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I mix this acrylic with,
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, the only problem with laying it on here is you get some on there. It's better to just
Yeah.
roll it on.
Now, do you have a preference whether, as far as doing the stenciling and the stamping with acrylic or watercolor?
No, no preference. It just depends what I'm doing. If I'm doing watercolor Yubo abstracts, it's all watercolor. And
Mm-hmm.
and I love watercolor because it's so easy to clean up. To me, acrylic is so messy. I get it on my clothes and I love it, but it's a lot. It's a lot sometimes to
Oh, yeah, yeah. That
deal
is the
with.
advantage of watercolor.
Yeah.
Now, that paper that you just printed on, was that hot press, cold press, or what?
This is cold press. That's another thing. If I printed this on hot press, it would be smoother.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and let's put it on Yupo. Yupo's nice and smooth. So that would give me a nice smooth, um, result, I hope.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's still some texture to it. And I
Yeah.
got it on the edge, so I'm making a mess. Um, but when
Yeah.
I'm working abstractly, those kinds of messes don't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I really was picky about it, I could trim this so it was more the shape of the stencil and
Oh,
not
yeah.
have that overlap
Uh-huh.
catching the paint. I could do that. In
Right.
fact, I think it might be smart to do that because it'll save me. I can do
Yeah.
it like this and leave one end as a tab and just do this.
Right.
So that's the nice thing about the foamies. See, I just
Uh-huh.
got rid of my problem.
Right. Now, but because it's on UPO, can you wipe up that acrylic off of the UPO paper or no?
Once it's dry, it's pretty permanent. See,
Mhm.
now I got a
Oh,
clean
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Nice
Uh,
and clean.
I can get that off with alcohol.
Okay.
I I think Simple Green will take that off too.
What is simple
Um,
green?
Simple Green is it's a cleaning thing. It's a like an all-purpose cleaner thing. And let's try because whenever you want to know, you got to just try. Let's try a baby wipe because baby wipes get acrylic off of everything.
Yeah.
So that's dry. And look at the
Oh, there
baby
you
wipe
go.
takes it right off.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So yeah,
Publix brand baby wipes. Okay.
this is just store brand.
Uh-huh.
So there's my story.
Well, that is really very interesting. And now, I mean, I have always wanted to, play with stencils and stamps and things, but knowing that, it's and the prospectus says no, no, of course I haven't done that. But sometimes we just have to play. And that looks like so much fun. I tell you what.
It
Let's
is
see if there's
fun
any
and
more
it's
questions here. I think we've got that. Okay, yeah, we got that. They got that. Yeah. This has just been so much fun, Suzanne. And it looks like you've had a really good time creating all of these stencils. And I think I have a coupon to Michael's and I will be going to get me some foam. Uh,
yep,
because that just looks like so much fun, I'll tell you.
it
Now, is
comes
there
in a
anything else
lifetime supply.
oh, yeah. Yeah, I've seen them where you can buy them in packs of what, like 10 or so?
Oh, that's better because I bought a package like this thick.
Oh,
I
you got
got
a big
tons
pack.
of it.
Oh, yeah, I probably would get a smaller one. Yeah, I did that with kids camp one year though. But wait, let me see. I think we had a couple more questions come in. Oh, thank you, Suzanne. Looks like a lot of fun. Oh, do you have any of your finished pieces handy?
Um, let's see. Not in here. Oh, wait, this one. Hold on, let me grab this.
Yeah, I was going to say that one on the back wall looks like.
Let's see. Let me go overhead again. And I can show you. And the thing is, I don't always use just that. Stencils
Yeah.
is
Oh,
hard
that's
for me
on
to
UPO. That's
square here.
beautiful.
Tilt it. But this is one of my stencils. I showed you earlier, these little white things.
Oh, really?
These
Wow.
circles are stencils. These
Uh-huh.
little dots were all stencils. Um, this stuff is a found material. It's punchinella,
Oh,
which is
okay.
what's left over when they punch out
Yeah.
sequins.
Mm-hmm.
So I use a combination of my own stencils and things, plus other objects like saran wrap and all
Right.
kinds of doodads to make different textures.
I love that. That's so nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And we were saying thank you so much. Great ideas. Thank you for sharing. We've enjoyed it so much. This has been great, Suzanne. And I think, we got to go to your demonstration at the convention now and see more. And so I just want to thank everyone for spending the evening with us tonight. And thank you, Suzanne, for sharing all of your fun tricks and tips here. I hope to see everyone in September in St. Petersburg. And please register soon and make my life easy so I can get those numbers and share it with the hotel. So hope to see you all next month at Third Thursday on August the 15th. So good night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.